おはようございます。私は amir です。Also known as Mirs. It's actually not in the morning. It is in the later stages of the afternoon on this very gloomy and rainy Southern California day. Just wanted to get on today. I was going to say this week, but I'm definitely not planning on doing these weekly. And there's, of course, there has been something on my mind, and I wanted to share with you guys a couple things. So first things first, this is not advice, and it's not in that territory. It's more so me talking to myself and trying to figure things out, and also sharing things that I've learned that has helped me. So not self-help. There's probably, well, there is many places to go for that. Much better than I would be able to deliver, because that's not my aim here. With that said, there is something that, so I've gotten very productive of late. And my gears are turning, and I'm thinking much more creatively lately than I had been prior within this time frame. Let's say 6 months. I've gotten very out of focus, and then somehow my focus has coalesced again into a much more solid form, and I'm thinking clearly, and so I think there's a few reasons for that, and it reminded me of something. Reminded me of my favorite book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Shinru Suzuki. This is a book that I read every year. Sometimes I read it up to 3 times a year, always 1 time a year. It's always on my nightstand. And I read it through. I don't just pick pages and read it, because every time I've read it, since I started reading it, probably about maybe around 7 years ago, every time I read it, I learn something new. There's very few books that do that for me. And this book is not a self-help book either. So if you can try to get a summary of this, and then you put it into DeepSeek or ChatGPT, and it spits something out, that will not be sufficient to understand this text. Now, if I open it up, and I'm sure you've heard the term, and you're probably very familiar with the term. And the thesis of it is in the very beginning. It says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. And this comes to my discussion here on what I've been thinking about. And I think you probably could relate if you're in the creative fields, and maybe you're not. Maybe you're adjacent to the creative fields, and somehow this still makes you, and maybe you're not in the creative fields, but this idea still has an effect. Now, beginner's mind, you can think about it as like, being a child, and there's so many possibilities, and you're really curious, and you're trying new stuff out and all this. But I also think it has to do with when you first get that creative spark, and it happens to people at different ages. For me, it happened in my late teens, early 20s, when I switched my paths from kind of a wandering, but I was kind of like focused on board sports, and like I was snowboarding a lot at that time. Once that diverted into a different path, the path of the arts. In my case, it started as acting, and then it went into directing and filmmaking. But and then also music as well, concurrently. But as second, it was secondary to the film stuff. one thing that was striking at that time is how free I felt to experiment and do things and try things, and completely felt very fearless, and everything felt new and fresh. And there wasn't a history, even though I studied film, like I watched a lot of films, I always felt like these ideas that I was having at that time were new and fresh, even if they weren't, even if they were completely derivative of something else, and they probably were of things that I had seen. I felt like this was a revolution happening, and I was leading a charge in it. And I think that is how a lot of creatives start. There is much less of this thinking of what has come before and trying to fit into those boundaries and frames. Instead, you are feeling this confidence, and a lot of it is part of, like, not only is it because you don't have an accumulated history, but there is an aspect of delusion as well. You just don't know. And not only you don't know, but it doesn't fucking matter that you don't know. And that's the beautiful thing about that particular moment at the very beginning stages. A lot of times you see major breakthroughs at that point in people's outputs. And then what happens is you start learning too much, and you start thinking you know a little too much, and you get into that stage, that middle stage. And the middle stage is where it's a plateau stage, and it's where most people end up and they stay. That's a space where you are no longer generating ideas. You are not as passionate. You know too much. You have too much backstory and history that you have to somehow keep intact, and you become much more of a fragile figure, because once you do things that are out of that norm, you maybe kind of are thinking about how people feel and other people's opinions about what you're doing, what your output is. And then there's a stage that often happens after, when you get older. So, and if you survive this plateau phase and you're still interested, you get into the latter stages and the later stages of people's works, and they go often back into this experimental, I don't give a fuck attitude, right? Now, part of it is the age thing, where you just don't care. You really don't care anymore. And then you start to get more experimental because your backstory and history don't mean as much to you anymore. And then there is the clock ticking of mortality. All of these combine to create another rebirth, another aspect of that beginner's mind, where you no longer think you know everything, and you're back to that stage of not knowing anything at all. It's kind of different. I think this is different than the feeling that you might get where let's say you've been playing the guitar for 20 years, or you're playing an instrument for 20 years, and you feel like, wow, it's infinite what you can learn, yet you're still boxed into your set. You're still boxed into being an expert, and you can teach people how to do it and all this stuff, but you can't break your own cycle. Now, I think there is a methodology to break out of that cycle, so you are not in the plateau and you're not in the stage where you feel like you're suffocating because you keep repeating your patterns. And for me, what I've come to figure out is that to really tap into that beginner's mind, and even into that delusional thing a little bit. Still stay grounded, but you have a little bit of that disconnection from your identity, your past history, and then more as important is all the shit around you as well. Like who's producing what, who's putting out what's this next film, what's this next book about, who painted this. When you can unplug from that, you have another avenue, especially when you do other things to kickstart that. For me, it's rapidly trying to learn something. When I try to do that, and I'm not talking about I'm talking about a thing that is opposite or adjacent to what I'm trying to do. If I start learning something really intensely, that starts firing new things in my head and my brain and body as one cohesive unit that allows me to come back to that thing with fresh eyes, and just as importantly, fearless eyes. And I think that's one of the key aspects that we get to in a middle space where we feel very boxed in. We are very fearful of making mistakes or doing things that other people might not like at all. If you focus on really rapidly learning other things, your curiosity sets in, and then you get that feeling again, that very early feeling of beginner's mind, where there's just infinite possibilities again, and you don't know what the end game is, but you're just learning things, and it's really cool and fun and all that. And you transmute that energy into the thing that you normally do all the time. And that's the bridge. That is the bridge from plateauing and then bringing in that idea of beginner's mind, that idea that you don't know anything really, except that you have a vision and you have these ideas and you want to get these ideas out into the world for whatever reason. Hopefully it's as intrinsic as it would be not, because that's one of the real big driving factors. It's almost impossible to explain why we want to do things. Even if you try to really describe it, it's one of those things. It's one of those human necessities. This idea that this kind of passing on and sharing of information that is like that is an emotional, spiritual bond, both for ourselves and somehow it gets expressed outwardly to other people. It's a beautiful thing, and that's the creative thing. I just hope that if you find this video and you are in that space where you think that you're kind of in a loop, a creative loop where you're just kind of doing what you've always done, and it's very disheartening because you don't think you can generate any new ideas, go learn something new. Unplug from all the other shit that's around. Don't worry about what's going on in the world. It's still going to be around, and I mean, maybe, but it'll probably be around in a couple months when you come back. But you will have kickstarted that amazing feeling, that feeling of infinite possibilities and your place in it, in putting your ideas out into that space without thinking that someone else has done that thing already. What's the point? A million people have made that kind of song before, used these chords before, did Cinema Verite before, made Dogma 95 before. Well, who fucking cares? Just go do what you want to do and have that drive, that experimental curiosity, the fun, the joy, this spark, and find that spark elsewhere, because sometimes you just can't find it where you're at. Can't find it in your media. Find it somewhere else. And then go back and think about that beginner's mind concept. Hope this has been, I don't know. Do I hope it's been helpful? I don't know. I just wanted to share. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.